Hi friends, my name is Polina, and I'm sure just by the title of this video you can already tell how much this one means to me. I want to start with a couple of things. I haven't watched many videos on this topic. I think I only saw one. I honestly don't know how those are supposed to be structured and what you should and shouldn't say, so I'm going with my gut here. I also want to mention, in case it wasn't clear from the title, that I will be speaking here about my drinking. If that's triggering for you for any reason, please feel free to skip this one. And something I think worth saying upfront: I have never been diagnosed with alcohol use disorder. I've never been to AA meeting. I've never had intervention from my friends or family. I've never been to rehab. And honestly, the whole thing might not feel like a big deal to some people, and that's completely fine. I do see it as an experiment. I don't yet know if it's going to be a lifelong one, but I take it very seriously. And throughout this year, I had a lot of thoughts, a lot of realizations, and honestly just discovered a lot about myself. I feel like this video can offer something valuable, maybe not to people with severe struggles with alcohol, but for people who are just starting to see some patterns that might feel scary to them, like it was with me. I started this experiment on June 17 of 2025. I had no set end date when I started, but I also couldn't imagine that a whole year would pass and I would still feel exactly the same about it. And before I get into the why, I think it's important to talk about my relationship with alcohol and the history behind it, both for me and within my family. I come from an Eastern European country that is very well known for its drinking culture. Alcohol has always just been there at parties, at family gatherings, honestly just on a regular evening as well. Growing up, bottles were just part of the table. I watched adults drink heavily from a pretty young age, and I also saw a lot of different shapes that alcohol consumption can take. Within my family, the history is honestly quite scary. I have relatives who are or were alcoholics. Some were formally diagnosed and went to AA meetings, and some caused a lot of pain to themselves, to their health, and to the people in their family, including people who are very close to me. Growing up, my dad would warn me more than once about the history of alcohol abuse within our family. And every time I heard those warnings, at 15, at 17, at 20, I didn't really take it in. When you are that age, all you want is to feel free, to find your own way. You don't want to carry someone else's story as a warning for your own life. So I didn't. It was only in the last couple of years, and especially throughout this year of sobriety, that I realized that, well, he wasn't being dramatic. He wasn't being overly cautious either. He was just being completely honest. It was sort of a quiet foreshadowing. I know now that every time he said it, he really meant it. What I've come to understand is that my drinking was really deeply linked to a feeling of freedom. I don't know if everyone has this sort of emotional thing with alcohol, like a specific feeling they're chasing, but mine is very clear to me and I can trace it back. It connects to my very first actual moments of freedom when I went abroad as a model and started for the first time living on my own, working, earning money, experiencing life, and going out. That first sip of alcohol has always carried for me the memory of that time. Every single time it would take me back to that feeling of being completely free, away from my home country, away from my school, away from my parents, just completely on my own and entirely responsible for myself. And it wasn't a scary feeling, it was one of the happiest feelings I'd ever had. Everything I had dreamed about throughout my childhood and through my teenage years, living, being independent, building something, was suddenly real. And somehow all of those experiences got intertwined with that first sip. So whenever I drank, I'd feel this wave of freedom wash over me. The worries would dissolve, the anxiety would quiet. There was just me again, living freely. And honestly, that's probably the truest reason why I was drinking throughout all of my adult life, to get back to that feeling. I'd find it in the first sip, and then again and again and again whenever I refilled that glass. What's interesting is that I always assumed that the people who are prone to addiction have high tolerance, that they can drink a lot, and that stopping is what's hard for them, that the hangover somehow does not hit them the same way. That's just my theory. I can be totally wrong, because my experience was the complete opposite. My body has always reacted strongly to alcohol. At 15, at 22, at 28, it didn't matter. The hangover was always there, and it only got worse with each year. I have never once in my life had a glass of wine and woken up the next day feeling fine. And I'm genuinely asking, can anyone? Because I would feel absolutely terrible every single time. It never stopped me, but around 25 it became harder and harder to ignore. It started to feel less like what my body was tolerating and like it was actually trying to reject it. Like something in me would quietly try to break the pattern before I would. Something else is worth saying, and this one took a moment to sit with. Within my circle, across all the different people I've met in my life, I have this feeling that if I told some of them today that I have stopped drinking, a few of them would genuinely be relieved. And that was the first sort of thought that truly scared me. There will be a few of those throughout this video, but that was the first one where I was like, wait, if a few people in my life would be relieved to know that I stopped drinking, doesn't that already say something? I was never an angry or a violent person whenever I drank. If anything, the opposite. I'm prone to blackouts even after just a few cocktails, and I would usually just lose the track of things and fall asleep. Pretty calm as far as drinking goes. But when I actually sit with situations I've put myself in over the years while drinking, I'm genuinely surprised that nothing more scary or serious happened to me. I moved through years of consumption without experiencing any kind of consequences that can come with early stage alcohol abuse. Though I guess how scary something might seem depends a lot on where you're standing when you're looking at it. When I first started drinking, it was always whenever I went out. Bars, parties, social things. I never kept alcohol at home, and somehow I managed to hold that line for a really, really long time in my life. There were occasional bottles shared with friends or with myself, but never anything recurring. That only changed much later. It really started when I got married and was going through my first immigration. About 8 years after, I discovered that I genuinely liked alcohol. I moved to a country that is very well known and very proud of its wine culture. And for the first time, I started actively buying bottles of wine and keeping them at home. At first it felt fun and casual, something to have when a friend comes over or when my husband and I were watching a movie. It felt adult, I don't know. And once again, it felt free. What I'm genuinely lucky to have is a husband who doesn't really like to drink. I think that's honestly one of the luckiest things in my life, because if I have been with someone who actually matched my drinking habits, I'd be looking at a very different version of myself today. When two people mirror each other's less healthy patterns, I think it becomes very hard for either of them see things clearly. I was spared that. In the beginning, my husband was happy enough to have wine around the house, but as we both grew, he kind of quietly stepped away from it. And that was around the time we have actually moved to another country, to our second country for immigration, and we're building a life somewhere new again. It was also the period when we hit the first real problems in our marriage. We were navigating a lot personally, professionally, with each other, and somewhere in that distance between the two of us, I introduced something new into my relationship with alcohol, and that was drinking alone. I told myself it was controlled, measured, something I had a handle on. What I didn't know then, and what I learned much later, is that controlled drinking can in itself be a form of addiction. If you are counting your drinks, if stopping feels like something that requires effort, that does not mean you don't have a problem. And I lived in that pattern for quite a couple of years before naming it and realizing it. We did eventually work through the hard parts. We rebuilt things, the external difficulties resolved themselves, but the pattern stayed. And that feeling I had been always chasing, that sense of freedom, kept coming reliably every time I drank. Something else that feels important to share is that throughout my whole adult life and throughout my whole drinking life, I also lived with severe anxiety. I was always an anxious person, and alcohol was the only thing that reliably turned the volume down for me. It was the only moment when the fear would quiet, when my emotions stopped feeling so overwhelming. In that sense, it was always a genuinely useful tool, and I always knew it. I've done a lot of therapy over the years, and about 2 years ago I went through another round. Something shifted in a way I haven't experienced before, and for the first time I realized I wasn't longer anxious. It's still kind of emotional to think about, honestly, because from around the age of 9 or 10, anxiety had always been a part of how I moved through life and through the world. And then at 27, it wasn't. That was, I don't even have the right word for it. Relief does not cover it, because I honestly never thought I would live without those feelings. And once that changed, something else shifted too. Because my drinking was always anchored to two things: the feeling of freedom and the relief from anxiety. With the anxiety gone, only one of those was left. And by that point, I had done enough work on myself to know and understand that freedom is one of my deepest values, and that it does not have to come from that first sip. It can live in financial independence, in authentic relationship, in travel, in expressing myself honestly, in not being scared of being judged. So the idea of narrowing it all down to alcohol started to feel unnecessary. What's interesting is that within that first month or maybe two after the anxiety lifted, I actually started thinking, maybe I should stop. I even tried, but my will wasn't quite there yet. And I couldn't really answer yet to the question of why I would. So whenever that thought came up, something would happen. A friend would mention wine or going to the bar, and I'd never feel that inner pull to be strong enough to say, actually, I've decided not to drink. I just didn't have that yet. So from those first quiet thoughts in November of 2024 all the way to June 2025, that's what, somewhere between 7 or 8 months of turning that idea in my head before actually stopping. I think we live in a beautiful time, despite everything happening in the world right now. And one of the reasons I say that is because not drinking is actually quite normalized in a way it wasn't before. Alcohol consumption looks very differently among Gen Z compared to millennials I grew up around. When I was 16, everyone around me was drinking. I don't remember one person who actively chose to stay sober, except maybe for the people who worked in clubs, who couldn't drink on a job and had probably watched enough drunk people around them to draw their own conclusions. Now I am surrounded a lot by Gen Z, mostly through work, and many of them either don't drink much or don't drink at all. And being around that has genuinely shifted something in me. I no longer think of sobriety as something boring or weird. It just is what it is. Though I have to say, I find it a little wild that the same generation has embraced smoking instead. And I say that with full awareness of the irony given what I'm speaking about in this video. But smoking to me always felt like the obvious bad habit, the one we collectively agreed wasn't worth it. But hey, who am I to judge? I also think it's so much more normalized right now for people my age and older to speak openly about their relationship with alcohol. Early stages, late stages, all of it. It's less shameful, less taboo. Even when I didn't have people around me modeling sobriety, hearing someone else's experience in the media planted something in my head. It introduced the possibility. And that brings me to two things that have really influenced me during those 8 months of just sitting with the idea. The first was a completely random clip that showed up on my For You page, and it was an interview with Tom Holland. In that clip, he just talked honestly about his drinking habits and how he chose to try sobriety for a little bit, and after some time he found it, well, the best decision he ever made. The second one was an interview with Lennon Doyle and her wife Abby Wambach. Both of them there shared their journeys through and beyond addiction. A few things they shared made me sort of stop and say, I've never heard anyone put it that way. And also, I kept recognizing myself in what they were describing. Not in a dramatic way, but in that a bit uncomfortable way where you sit and think, well, that's my experience in a way too. And there were the moments where something clicked and where I went from just turning idea in my head to thinking, okay, maybe this is actually the time for me. As I mentioned, my body has always had some sort of reaction to alcohol, but I'd say in the last couple of years, somewhere between 26 and 28, I started feeling genuinely horrible, not just the next morning, but also throughout the whole night after consuming just a little bit of alcohol. My strategy was water. I'd have a few glasses of wine or a few cocktails and would try to somehow offset it with enormous amounts of water. What that actually produced was this very specific sort of misery, not drunk enough to just fall asleep and not sober enough to sleep well throughout the night. So I'd lie there with the alcohol headache already sort of settling in, making trips to the bathroom 3, 4, 5 times a night from all the water I drank, just cycling through this shallow, restless non-sleep. That might feel worth it when you're a teenager or when you're in your early 20s with nowhere to be tomorrow. But when you have an actual job, real responsibilities in the morning, or just want to enjoy your weekend, it started to feel honestly stupid to just continue doing this to myself. Strangely enough, what turned out to be the last chapter of this story was a visit from my in-laws. My husband's mother and his stepfather came to stay for a few days. We shared a few bottles of wine, a few cocktails, nothing crazy, nothing embarrassing, no blackouts, just a normal, pleasant visit. Yet, the morning they left, I woke up with something settled in me. I thought, okay, I am starting this experiment. I'm going to stop and I'm going to see where it takes me. I didn't know the concept of counting forward at the time. I hadn't really thought it through. I hadn't even had the last proper drink. And that strangely became this weird source of sadness throughout this year. My last experience with alcohol wasn't even that good. It wasn't a favorite bottle of wine or my favorite cocktail. It was just random, unremarkable consumption. And so many times this year, I think I didn't even enjoy it at the end. I just stopped. So if you're watching this and feel strongly about making a change, I want to genuinely suggest having some kind of closing ritual. I'm not encouraging drinking at all, but if you are someone who values marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another one, it might be worth doing it properly, because not having it stayed with me longer than I expected. It didn't derail me. I never got to 3 months and thought, wait, I haven't had that last drink, let me go have it and then begin the experiment again. But it was still a quiet source of sadness and annoyance, if I'm being honest. When I began, I couldn't imagine being a full year in. The first interesting moment came when I actually told some of my friends that I will not be joining them in drinking. It was one of those situations when a friend told me, I cannot wait to see you, we will get wine and we will go to the beach. And for the first time I said, actually, I stopped and I will not be joining you, but you're free to do whatever you wish. I'm not going to stop you. And it wasn't a big deal. Nobody was bothered. It was entirely normal. What did feel monumental was my first sober vacation. My husband and I, along with another couple that we've known for a couple of years, went to the north of Spain. In the past, the 3 of us would always drink together. One person in the group had stopped a long time ago and was always the only sober one. But that August, I became the second. And what I found genuinely striking was watching the other two people's alcohol consumption drop significantly compared to every other time we spent together. And I realized really clearly that in group settings, I'm the person who usually encourages everyone to drink, to order another round. Seeing so clearly that when I stopped, the other people around me didn't drink as much either was my first sober wake-up call. I remember thinking I'm not only bad influence on myself, I'm also a bad influence on the people around me. And yes, you shouldn't carry responsibility of the other people's choices. I know that. But for me, it was an important and honestly quite humbling moment. It was also a very new scenario in general because I had always drank on vacation. That stretch of time when you have nowhere to be, nothing to answer for in the morning. Before this, I would have a drink, and maybe not one drink, but a few, every night of a week-long vacation. So to spend 2 weeks with friends, I used to drink and stay completely sober throughout. I'm genuinely surprised I pulled it off so early on without it feeling like a struggle. I think it helped that one person in the group already wasn't drinking and I sort of just joined them, and the other two were never really big drinkers on their own. They were mostly just going along with me. Then came a series of important celebrations, ones I can't even remember experiencing sober. Our wedding anniversary, the birthday of the agency my husband and I co-founded, the anniversary of beginning our relationship, which falls on Christmas, and then New Year's. What's interesting is that the last 3 of those all happened during our second vacation, which was a month long. By that point, I was already 6 months in and I had already lived through a couple of celebrations sober, so I knew I could do it. And it was during that trip when something new again happened. I was at a dinner where everyone ordered at least 1 drink. Nobody there was a heavy drinker to begin with. And yet I was the only one who ordered only water. Sitting at that table entirely sober where everyone around me had something in their glass. That was a completely new experience to me. Those first 6-7 months right before we returned from the vacation and I hit the 7 months mark, I would honestly describe it as the easier part of this experiment. I didn't feel many struggles. I was curious about it. Yes, I missed alcohol, and yes, I was a little envious of the people sitting right in front of me and enjoying their drinks, but I didn't feel triggered. There wasn't much darkness in it. And then I entered something I can only describe as a dark cloud, and honestly, I don't feel like I'm entirely out of it. These last 5 months have been much less linear, more up and down in ways that have genuinely upset me sometimes. It was during that time that I have started to look at myself, at my life, at my habits more honestly. This was also the moment I have stopped wishing to make YouTube videos and actually began. It was also around this time when I was finishing the artist way and was deep into my morning pages practice, writing these long entries for 12 weeks straight. And something about writing the same things over and over again cracked something open. I started looking more honestly at what my drinking had actually been giving me. That's when all the pieces, the anxiety, the freedom, all of it really started connecting. And then other things started to shift too. I started to question whether social media was actually making me happy, whether the reality shows I was watching on Netflix were actually bringing me anything. I began all of my detox experiments, and I think that period was more of a harder time because all of the habits that would define my downtime were completely gone, and all at once. And I think by nature, I'm someone who likes deeply to enjoy life. I'm hedonistic. I like to chill. I like to travel, to read, to feel completely free and unbothered. So it was a struggle and it was disorienting to find myself without access to things that had always been a part of how I enjoy life. It had been so normal for me to end the day, open a bottle of red wine, order food, start a YouTube video, a podcast episode, or a Netflix show, and just completely dissolve into nothingness for a couple of hours. Alone, unbothered, fully at ease. It was a very specific ritual of relief. And then all of that was gone at the same time. It was also during that darker period of time that two main celebrations came up, my husband's birthday and my own birthday, which at this time were even wrapped in a little bit of traveling. And even then, the decision to continue to stay sober stayed clear to me. If I were to sum up this past year of my life, I would describe it as it was really easy and it was really hard at the same time. A few days a week, I walk to the gym, and a good chunk of that walk takes me down a bar street where people sit outside, enjoy their company of friends or their dates, and, well, drink. I walk past them again and again, and I never once find myself thinking, oh my god, I cannot hold it together. I need a drink. I need one. The same true during those moments with friends and gatherings and celebrations when people were drinking in front of me. It was never a real struggle. I could find my footing easily without having to remind myself why I started this experiment, and I didn't have to talk myself out of anything. I wasn't tempted in a way I expected. The harder moments were different. They were quieter and more internal, where the old patterns used to live. The evenings where I felt tired or overwhelmed or just wanted to run away from the overwhelming thoughts in my head. Those were the moments where I would turn to my husband and say, I really wish I could have a drink right now. And those were the moments that would show up during my diary entries. Long, honest reflections where I would write, I cannot believe I might never have a drink again. Those thoughts genuinely upset me sometimes. And to give you an example, I stopped eating meat in the end of 2019. So what, like 6.5 years ago? It was never a struggle. From that day to now to, I'm sure, the end of my life, I never look at meat and think, oh my god, I wish I could have that right now. I just don't care. It's not hard. It's not something I miss. It left my life and I let it go without a second thought. I really, really hoped that after 1 year I would feel the same about alcohol. And I'm so sad to admit that I don't. I do miss it sometimes. I do want it sometimes. And when I say that or even think that, it honestly makes me want to cry, because it makes me feel like I'm not strong enough, like I failed myself somehow, or like I actually do have a problem. Because if I didn't, I wouldn't miss it. It would just be gone and I wouldn't care. I know some people might say, you're making too much out of it. Missing something doesn't mean anything is wrong. But I have people in my life who I tell these things. I say them out loud, and then those people look concerned. And they tell me, I don't feel this way. I wouldn't feel sad if I would never drink again. Just like that. Easy, uncomplicated. Like me with meat. The second darkest moments are when I talk about it with people and share honestly that I'm struggling, that I miss it, because most people in my circle simply cannot understand. That was the first time I truly got it, why people who are dealing with addiction and trying to overcome it go to meetings, because there you can talk to people who understand without having to explain yourself. You hopefully don't feel weird, you don't feel judged, nobody tries to fix you, nobody tries to redirect you. You can just exist in your struggle, honestly, without having to manage everyone else's reaction to it. Because what I experienced when I share things like that, and I'll give you an example, is that I will be speaking honestly, vulnerably, and I'll hear, you're doing such a great thing for you, good job. Or, this is so amazing, what you're doing is so inspiring. And I say this with all love, and I ask everyone in my life to forgive me, but those words make my blood boil. because it feels like the kindest way possible of not hearing me at all. I'm not looking for praise. I'm sharing something real. And those responses make me feel like my experience has just been quietly set aside in favor of something more comfortable to say. And it was, again, one of those moments when I thought, maybe this is really something, because I am not someone who struggles to articulate what I'm feeling clearly, and still most people just don't get it. I'm genuinely fortunate, even though I have been complaining about the people around me for a couple of minutes right now, to say that almost everyone in my life has been wonderfully understanding. My mom is on cloud 9 whenever I share that I'm 7, 10, 12 months in. She's so genuinely happy. And I think it's because she has seen firsthand what it looks like when people you love struggle with addiction. She's so relieved that I chose to stop early, before it had the chance to become something more serious, which, knowing my patterns, could realistically have happened. Only very recently did I experience where a person just couldn't grasp that I was serious about it, that it somehow became something that I couldn't just stop and return to after. I was genuinely shocked to be so actively encouraged to drink. Even after I explained my reasoning, that person just couldn't take it in. It was a little strange of an experience, but it also made me realize how lucky I've been in the last year, because for an entire year the people around me have always responded with something, girl, do you, we don't care, nothing changes for us, whatever. That said, whenever I've talked to people who aren't living through the same experiences and haven't made the same choice to stay sober, there is a limit to how much they can really meet me there. And at some point it starts to wear on people. People who still drink don't know what to do with your honesty about why you stopped. It makes them uneasy even in the moments when they aren't drinking themselves. I've begun noticing it even with my husband. I see it in the friends who don't really know what to say and reach for those well-meaning but not really needed encouraging words. And I start to think about it in the way I think about not eating meat. I never bring it up unless I am asked or need to mention it for a particular reason, because for some reason it sends people into a whole orbit. I'm beginning to think that the same quiet approach might serve me better here too. And I think it goes beyond the people I know. We live in a society that still isn't really comfortable with vulnerability. We are not used to people admitting that they're prone to certain things, that they have patterns worth watching. We find it easier to keep those things to ourselves. If you decide to go on this fun adventure of not drinking, I do recommend finding a non-alcoholic drink that can serve as a kind of anchor. Something to reach for in those moments when you want to unwind, forget things for a bit, or just have something in your hand that feels more than nothing. Personally, I came up with a cocktail of my own, and it has only 3 ingredients: a good amount of ice, sparkling water, and a few slices of lime. The mineral water gives you that tingly, slightly sharp feeling in your throat that a fun, bubbly cocktail would give, like an Aperol Spritz. But it also doesn't taste like plain still water, which would feel a little sad. And if you don't overthink it, it can almost pass for something alcoholic. It obviously isn't, but I genuinely enjoy it. 2 glasses of this while watching a movie or just winding down have helped me more than I expected. It also has this quiet social benefit. The drink looks fun and can easily be mistaken for something that contains vodka or tequila, which tends to make people around you feel a little less awkward for drinking in front of you. It's also very cheap to order in restaurants, though sadly many of them do not have lime, they only have lemon, which does diminish the effect somewhat, but even just sparkling water with lemon and ice still does the job. So there you go, and you're welcome. Cheers. And a little bit of the summer edition. If you do like the taste of mint, like I do, you can add it to this little cocktail. We're gonna mix it. I'll listen to the ice and to the sparkling water. Yay! Very nice. I think this conversation matters because growing up, I saw this as a very black and white thing. You either have a problem with alcohol or you don't. You're either a normal person or you are an alcoholic. That was the full spectrum as far as I understood it. And coming from an Eastern European country with such a deep drinking culture, the examples I had of a problem were always the extreme ones, the far end of addiction, the kind that is impossible to miss once you know what you're looking at. My mom would quietly point things out to me sometimes, though she didn't always have to. Those examples were very visible and they were, well, quite frightening. And so I would look around my own life and think, well, nobody around me looks like that. And I was completely blind to everything that was in between. I didn't see the people in my circle or in my family who drank every day, but just knew when to stop most of the time. I didn't register that as anything worth noting. It just looked normal to me because it was everywhere. And honestly, I never viewed myself as someone with a problem either. In my teens, I thought, well, I am just young and I'm just figuring out how to drink responsibly. A couple of blackouts, whatever. I didn't care. In my early 20s, I'm an adult. I know what I'm doing. And now I look back and think, oh, you might have had a problem this whole time. And the thing is, nobody really laid it out for me. Nobody sat me down, not in my family and not among my friends, and said, look, if you notice these things in yourself, that might mean something. And it's okay to ask for help. Nobody walked me through it without judgment or shame or guilt. There were occasionally people who would say, maybe you should slow down. But it was never a real, honest conversation. Never something presented to me with care and clarity. I guess one thing I have been reflecting quite a lot about throughout this year is how genuinely normalized drinking is. It's even glamorized if you think about it. All the beautiful bars and pretty little cocktails, expensive wine glasses. It's in a way just another form of subculture. And it's normalized through different social media outlets and aesthetic pictures. What's quietly sitting behind it is the habit that in no way, shape or form can be described as a necessary one, or definitely not as a healthy one. As I've been going through this very weird and new stage of my life where I'm removing all the unnecessary noise from social media and podcasts and shows, I do look differently at where we are today as people, as grown adults who move through life, and how many distractions there are on our way. I question a lot why we need so many distractions. And I guess I also wonder what we are in a way choosing to distract ourselves from. Because although obviously for me, drinking was always a way of numbing certain feelings and somehow got even connected with one of my biggest values in life, I now look at this time, which was like half of my life, and the different forms of consumption I have experienced. Those felt sort of important and even necessary to get through life. I guess what I'm coming to is that if you're looking for clarity in your life and you feel like it's too much and it has been quite overwhelming and you are feeling kind of weighted down by all the things around you, the first recommendation, which has really worked for me, is removing all of those unnecessary things. And sometimes you don't even see it as unnecessary until you step away. I know this video hasn't been exactly uplifting. I'm not sitting here beaming and telling you this has been the best year of my life, that everything has changed and I will never look back, and that I feel absolutely amazing. I'm here sharing the honest version, the good and the hard, and I think that does sum up this year pretty accurately. What I learned about myself throughout this year was genuinely eye-opening. As you could probably tell from this video or anything I have shared on this channel, I'm a very reflective person. I feel diary pages. I cannot stop talking in therapy or with my friends. So I've turned all of this in my mind so many times that I think the people in my life are pretty tired of hearing about my realizations at this point. And in a way, this video is a second promise to myself. The first one was to stop drinking, and the second being is to stop making it everyone else's problem. To end on a brighter note though, surprisingly, in the last couple of months, I've been getting quite a few compliments. People have been telling me I haven't looked this good in a while. And for the first time in almost 20 years, people are actually surprised when they hear my age, saying I look younger than I am. I have honestly never heard that. Not since I was 10. I had fully come to terms with the fact that I will never hear it again. So I'll take it. Now, I cannot attribute this entirely to just not drinking. Because as I mentioned, I also work out, I eat pretty healthy, I try to sleep 8 hours, I meditate, I keep a gratitude journal, I have hobbies, I have my own business, I don't have toxic people around me. Any or all of those things can be behind those compliments. Or maybe the people around me are just kind. Maybe you're watching this right now and you think, girl, you look exactly 29. And to that I say, okay, fair enough, but like, shut up. I'm moving forward with this experiment the same way I've done in the last year, 1 month at a time. I would love to come back to you with another update after 1 more year. And I also wouldn't be surprised if I don't. Because as I shared here, it isn't easy. Not always. I know that does not sound encouraging, but I hope it sounds honest, which matters much more to me. I genuinely wish people had more honest conversations about their habits, good and bad, about their careers, about their relationships and family dynamics. I'm lucky to have that in my close circle, but I am staying hopeful and I'm very much looking forward to continue discovering things about myself through all of this. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!